Disclaimer: this video contains discussions of real criminal cases and sensitive subject matter. It is created for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. She was young, radiant, and full of dreams. At just 23, Lauren Smith Fields was building her life, studying, working hard, and looking toward a bright future. But on a cold December morning in 2021, she was found lifeless in her apartment, her phone still buzzing from worried calls that would never be answered. What followed wasn't just the death of a beautiful young woman, it was a haunting mystery that exposed deep cracks in how some cases are handled and how justice sometimes feels unevenly distributed. This is the story of Lauren Smith Fields, a case that raised painful questions and left a family still searching for the truth. She was only 23, a bright college student with dreams far bigger than the small apartment she lived in. She had plans to travel, to finish school, to build a life that matched her potential. But on one cold December morning, her mother's phone rang with the kind of call no parent should ever receive. Lauren Smith Fields, her beautiful, ambitious daughter, had been found unresponsive in her own apartment. What followed wasn't just heartbreak, it was confusing, silence, and a growing storm of questions that no one seemed willing to answer. From the very beginning, something about Lauren's death didn't make sense. A young woman, healthy, vibrant, and full of life, suddenly gone after meeting a man she'd only known for a short time. A man much older than her. A man who claimed she simply fell asleep and never woke up. But when her family arrived at the apartment, they found a scene that screamed for attention, evidence left untouched, questions ignored, and an investigation that, according to them, felt like an afterthought. This isn't just the story of a tragic death. It's the story of a family's fight to be heard, of a mother's voice echoing into a system that didn't seem to care. And it's the story of how one young woman's name became a symbol for something much larger: justice denied and trust broken. Because even now, years later, one haunting question remains: what really happened to Lauren Smith Fields? Lauren's story began like so many others in her generation. She was balancing college, work, and the pursuit of happiness in a world that often demanded too much. She had a close, knit family, a circle of friends who adored her, and a personality that drew people in. In early December 2021, she started talking to someone new, a man she met through a dating app. Their messages seemed harmless. He was older, more experienced, and appeared polite. Lauren told a friend she wasn't nervous, just curious. It was supposed to be a simple evening: drinks, conversation, maybe a movie. The night they met, she welcomed him into her home. No one could have imagined that by sunrise she'd be gone. According to his version of events, they drank tequila, played games, watched movies, and talked for hours. He claimed she eventually got tired, went to bed, and never woke up. But there was something deeply unsettling about how everything unfolded after that. When the man called 911, he was calm. Too calm, some said. He told dispatchers he had woken up next to her lifeless body. Paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Lauren was pronounced dead at the scene, and that's where the family's nightmare truly began. Her mother didn't get a call from detectives or medical officials. She found out from a landlord's note taped to her door, a note that said her daughter had passed away. Imagine that, losing your child not through an official call, not through compassion or care, but through a piece of paper left behind. When the family rushed to Lauren's apartment, they expected to find a sealed scene, investigators collecting evidence, fingerprints, forensic teams searching for answers, but what they found instead was chilling. The apartment hadn't been cleaned or even processed properly. Blood, Stained sheets were still on the bed. The same wine glasses used that night were still sitting there. A used condom and medication bottles were left untouched. It was as though no one had bothered to care. The man she had met, the last person to see her alive, was never detained, never handcuffed, not even treated as a suspect. According to the family, one officer told them, he seemed like a nice guy. We don't see any need to investigate further. That statement cut through the Smith, Field's family, like a knife, because how could anyone decide so quickly that there was nothing more to look into? Lauren's mother, Chantal, refused to accept it. She began calling the department daily, asking for updates, begging for answers. But the days turned into weeks, and the silence grew louder. It wasn't until the family took matters into their own hands, reaching out to journalists, demanding media coverage, and hiring an independent pathologist, that people began to take notice. Then came the toxicology report, the official cause of death, an accidental overdose of fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, and alcohol. But Lauren's family didn't believe it. They said she wasn't a drug user, that she would never willingly take something so dangerous. They believed someone may have given her the substances without her knowledge. They also questioned how investigators could rule out foul play so quickly when there were so many inconsistencies. Why wasn't the wine tested? Why was the crime scene released so soon? Why had the police treated the man she met as a nice person, instead of the prime witness or even potential suspect he was? Nothing about the investigation felt right. And as the family searched for truth, they uncovered an even deeper issue, one that wasn't just about Lauren, because this case wasn't only about what happened that night. It was about how society handles the deaths of young women of color. Why does it take public outrage or celebrity attention for some cases to be taken seriously? Why do some families have to scream for their loved ones to be seen? It wasn't until Lauren's story started trending online, until thousands of strangers demanded justice using the hashtag #JusticeForLauren, that the Bridgeport Police Department finally began to feel the pressure. The public demanded accountability, the family demanded transparency, and the city had no choice but to act. Eventually, 2 detectives were suspended for mishandling the investigation, the same detectives who failed to properly notify the family and process evidence. But even with that step, the wounds remained, because suspension doesn't equal justice, and paperwork doesn't bring back a daughter. Lauren's family still had to live with the unanswered questions, questions that haunted them every night. Questions that remain unanswered to this day. How did fentanyl get into her system? Why wasn't the apartment treated as a potential crime scene? Why did it take public outrage for her story to matter? Lauren's mother still visits her daughter's grave, her voice breaking as she whispers promises that she'll keep fighting, that she'll never stop until the truth is known, because for the Smith, Field's family, this isn't over. Not until someone, somewhere, takes accountability for the system that failed her. And so, the name Lauren Smith, Fields, continues to echo across the internet, through protests, through documentaries, through every mother who fears her daughter could be next. Lauren's story isn't just a tragedy, it's a mirror reflecting how easily justice can be delayed, distorted, or denied. A bright young woman is gone, a mother's heart is broken, and a community still demands the answers that were never given. Until those answers come, this case and the pain it carries will never fade. Lauren Smith, Fields, deserves more than silence. She deserves the truth. She deserves justice, and the world is still waiting for both. In the days after Lauren's death, her apartment became both a crime scene and a symbol, a silent reminder of how quickly a young life could be erased and forgotten. Her makeup was still neatly arranged on her dresser. Her college notebooks were stacked by her desk. The blanket she used to wrap herself in during cold nights was still folded on the couch. It looked like life was interrupted. Her mother, Chantal, sat on the edge of Lauren's bed for hours, staring at the space where her daughter should have been. Every item in that room whispered a story of dreams unfinished and questions unanswered. Lauren had plans. She wanted to travel. She wanted to graduate. She wanted to find love, to build a future that matched her energy and her light. But those plans ended in a single night, and the investigation, the one that was supposed to bring her family peace, only brought frustration and disbelief. The Bridgeport Police Department claimed they were handling the matter, but the family said they were left in the dark. For days, no one from the department reached out. No updates, no compassion, no transparency. It wasn't until her family took their story public that the cracks in the investigation became impossible to ignore. Friends, activists, and strangers from all over the country began posting her photo, demanding to know why this case wasn't being treated like any other suspicious death. People began asking the same painful question: would things have been different if Lauren weren't a young black woman? Because for too many families, this wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. When black women disappear, when they die under unclear circumstances, their cases often fade quietly from the news cycle. The urgency disappears, the questions stop, the world moves on, but Lauren's family refused to let that happen. They stood outside the Bridgeport Police Department with signs reading, "Justice for Lauren," and black women deserve to be heard. Reporters began to show up. Television crews came, and finally, after weeks of silence, the police were forced to address what had gone wrong. In January 2022, the medical examiner's report confirmed what the department had already hinted at: an accidental overdose. Fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, and alcohol, a deadly combination. But to Lauren's family, that answer only deepened their pain. They knew their daughter, they knew her habits, her lifestyle, her fears, and none of it aligned with that conclusion. Lauren wasn't a drug user. She was cautious, especially around strangers. Her family suspected she had been given the substances without her knowledge. If that were true, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was a crime, yet no one seemed willing to investigate that possibility. The man who was with her, the last person to see her alive, had walked away freely. He cooperated with police, answered a few questions, and left. No follow-up, no search warrant, no DNA request. He was never labeled a suspect, not even a person of interest. That, more than anything, is what haunted Lauren's family. They didn't just lose a daughter, they lost faith in a system that was supposed to protect her. The case soon drew national attention. Celebrities, activists, and journalists started speaking out. Rapper Cardi B shared Lauren's story on social media, demanding justice and accountability. Her post went viral overnight, forcing mainstream outlets to cover the case. Suddenly, what had been a local story became a national conversation. The spotlight grew brighter, and the city of Bridgeport could no longer ignore the outrage. Officials announced an internal investigation into how the case had been handled, not only for Lauren, but for another woman, Brenda Lee Rawls, whose family also accused the department of negligence after her sudden death the very same day. 2 detectives were suspended for their mishandling of both cases. It was a start, but it didn't feel like justice. To Lauren's family, it felt like a bandage placed over a wound that was still bleeding. They didn't want suspensions, they wanted truth. The family hired attorney Darnell Crossland, who became their voice in the fight for accountability. In a statement, he said, "If it wasn't for the family's persistence, this case would have been swept under the rug. Lauren's life mattered, and her family deserves answers. But the answers never came quickly. Every step forward felt like a battle. Every meeting with police brought more questions than clarity, and the deeper they looked into the timeline, the stranger it became. Phone records, toxicology, evidence left behind, details that didn't add up. Lauren's brother recalled that her Cash App, debit cards, and personal items were still in the apartment. Nothing was missing. There was no sign of forced entry. So what really happened between the time she met that man and the moment she was found? How did the drugs enter her system? Was there something she didn't know was being mixed into her drink that night? Or was it something much darker, something deliberately done to her? No one could answer those questions definitively. And that uncertainty is what continues to make this case so painful. In the months that followed, Lauren's name became a rallying cry for justice reform. Her photo appeared at vigils, her story shared at rallies across the country. Her mother spoke on national television, her voice breaking but steady, saying, "My daughter was not disposable. She deserves the same care and attention as anyone else." The city's mayor eventually promised to improve how police communicate with victims' families, mandating sensitivity training and better internal oversight. But even those promises felt hollow to the Smith, Fields family. Because what they truly wanted, what they still want, is the truth. Who gave Lauren those drugs? What really happened in that apartment? And why did it take a social media storm to make anyone care? Even now, Lauren's memory lives on in the people she inspired. Her friends describe her as radiant, the kind of person who lit up every room. Her family remembers her laugh, her sense of humor, her kindness. They've turned their grief into advocacy, founding initiatives that push for better investigations into the deaths of young black women. But every anniversary of her death feels like reopening the same wound. The pain never leaves, the questions never fade, and the silence from those who should have had answers still hurts the most. Because the truth is, Lauren's story is not just about one night or one investigation. It's about every woman whose story could have been hers. Every mother fears that if her daughter goes missing, no one will care until it's too late. Every system that needs to be rebuilt from the ground up to ensure that justice is not selective. Lauren Smith, Fields' case remains a haunting example of what happens when questions are ignored, when evidence is left untouched, and when families are forced to become investigators in their own tragedies. She should have been protected, she should have been believed, and she should still be alive, but even in death, she sparked something powerful, a movement, a demand for truth, and a collective refusal to let her name fade into silence. Her mother still visits her grave and whispers, "I'm still fighting for you." And somewhere between grief and justice, that fight continues not just for Lauren, but for every life that deserved more than a headline and a closed file. Because until every question is answered, the story of Lauren Smith Fields will never truly be over. Months passed, but the Smith Fields family refused to let their daughter's name disappear from the public consciousness. Every sunrise brought another reminder that Lauren's story had become more than just a tragedy. It had become a symbol of something larger, something systemic. Lauren was gone, but her mother's voice had become her echo. Chantal Fields appeared on local and national broadcasts, often holding a framed photo of Lauren, her radiant smile frozen in time. Each appearance carried the same plea: do not let my daughter be forgotten. Do not let them bury this case under silence. The public began to see what the family already knew. This wasn't just a story about one woman's death. It was about what happens when compassion is replaced by complacency, and when certain lives are treated as if they matter less. Lauren's case brought a spotlight to something many families had whispered about for years: the disproportionate media coverage of missing or murdered women of color. Sociologists have long called it missing white woman syndrome, a phrase describing how the disappearances or deaths of white women often dominate headlines, while women of color fade quickly from view. Lauren's story broke through that barrier, but only because her family refused to accept silence as an answer. It took their relentless pressure, social media outrage, and celebrity attention to force the world to look, and that in itself was a tragedy, because no family should have to fight that hard to be heard. By mid-2022, Bridgeport officials had concluded their internal investigation. They admitted failures, they admitted the case was mishandled, but no one was charged. No new suspects were named, and no clear explanation emerged about how fentanyl entered Lauren's system. The accidental overdose label remained. For Lauren's family, that phrase became unbearable. It wasn't just the official cause of death, it was a statement that erased everything they knew about who Lauren was. She was responsible, driven, careful. She didn't take unnecessary risks, and she didn't surround herself with dangerous people. To them, calling her death an accident was an insult, one that allowed accountability to vanish. Her mother described it best. They called it accidental because it was easier that way, easier for them to close a file than to search for the truth. The questions still linger. If the man she met wasn't responsible, then who was? If it was truly an accident, why were so many procedures ignored? Why wasn't her blood alcohol level cross-checked with the contents of her drinks? Why weren't the items in her home properly analyzed for fingerprints or DNA? Each unanswered question pointed toward the same painful truth, that somewhere along the way, Lauren was failed by those who were supposed to protect her. The system didn't just overlook her, it abandoned her. As time went on, the fight for justice became both exhausting and sacred for her family. They filed a notice of claim against the city of Bridgeport, alleging racial bias and negligence. They demanded transparency, accountability, and reform. The case inspired new advocacy groups dedicated to amplifying the stories of black women whose deaths remain unsolved or ignored. At vigils, supporters held candles and wore shirts with Lauren's face printed across them, her smile illuminated in the flicker of candlelight. Her name was chanted softly but firmly, Lauren Smith, Fields, Justice for Lauren. Every chant, every tear, every flame, it all carried a message that her life mattered, that her story mattered, that her death would not be forgotten. By 2023, Bridgeport police had implemented new protocols for handling unexplained deaths, promising family notifications, evidence preservation, and better communication. But for the Smith, Fields family, it was bittersweet. Because those changes came too late for Lauren. The system had already failed her when it mattered most. And so, the family turned their pain into purpose, not only fighting for their daughter, but for every young woman whose story risked being erased. Her mother created the Lauren Smith Fields Foundation for Change, an initiative aimed at helping families navigate investigations, ensuring they are treated with respect and compassion. Through this, Lauren's name became a beacon, one tied to reform, not tragedy. The Foundation's mission was clear: to make sure no other family would ever have to beg for attention, to make sure no other mother would ever have to find out her child was gone from a note on a door, to make sure no one else would ever be dismissed as just another case. Even today, years later, the pain hasn't faded. Lauren's mother still visits her grave. She brings flowers, bright yellow lilies, her daughter's favorite, and tells her about the people she's helped. She tells her about the letters from strangers, from other mothers, from families who now have the courage to demand answers because of Lauren's story. She whispers that her voice has changed lives, that her death was not in vain. But when the candles go out and the crowds fade, she's left with the same quiet question that still haunts her heart. Who did this to my daughter? because despite all the media attention, all the reports, and all the promises, no one has ever been held accountable. And so, the case remains what it always was, a wound without closure. Lauren Smith Field's story continues to echo across America, a haunting reminder that justice at times can be selective. Her face, once a smiling reflection of youth and ambition, has become a symbol of both grief and resilience. She represents every woman whose story never made the front page, every family forced to become detectives in their own pain, every unanswered question that the world should never stop asking. Her story is not over, not truly, because every time her name is spoken, every time someone demands justice, her spirit lives on. Her mother once said they thought they could bury her story, but they didn't know that her name would grow roots. Those roots have spread into hearts, into headlines, into the conscience of a nation that must do better. Lauren Smith Fields was not just a statistic, she was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and though she can no longer speak for herself, her story has become a voice for many. Until the day the full truth is revealed, until every question is answered, until every life is valued equally, her name will remain a reminder of the fight that continues. Because justice is not a privilege, it's a promise, and for Lauren, that promise is still waiting to be kept. In loving memory of Lauren Smith Fields, may her light continue to shine in the pursuit of justice and truth. To her family, may your strength inspire change, and may the answers you seek one day bring you peace. As 2023 faded into 2024, the world continued to change, but for the Smith Fields family, time seemed frozen in place. Each passing day without closure felt like a wound reopening. Each unanswered question was a reminder that justice still hadn't been served. But Lauren's name and the movement her story sparked refused to die. Her face continued to appear across social media timelines, documentaries, podcasts, and true crime discussions. People who had never met her felt an emotional connection to her story because in Lauren's tragedy, they saw something painfully familiar, the fragile line between neglect and injustice. Lauren's story began to shift from heartbreak to activism. Her mother, once voiceless in the aftermath of grief, had become a symbol of courage. She stood on stages, on courthouse steps, at rallies filled with candles and signs that read, "Justice for Lauren, accountability for all." Her voice carried through megaphones and news microphones alike, steady and unrelenting. My daughter didn't die in vain. Because of her, the world is finally listening. Through tears and determination, Chantal turned pain into purpose. The Lauren Smith Fields Foundation grew in scope, advocating not only for Lauren, but for other families who faced the same silence and indifference from authorities. They began offering emotional and legal support, organizing workshops, and pushing for legislative change. And soon, lawmakers began to take notice. In early 2024, Connecticut legislators introduced proposals inspired in part by Lauren's case. The goal, to improve how deaths under suspicious circumstances are handled, especially when young women are involved. The reforms included stricter requirements for family notifications, transparency protocols for law enforcement, and increased accountability for mishandled investigations. Lauren's mother stood proudly at the signing ceremony, tears streaming down her face as officials acknowledged her daughter's legacy. It was a bittersweet moment, justice not achieved in the courtroom, but in the laws that would now bear Lauren's invisible fingerprints. For Chantal, it wasn't enough, but it was something, a beginning, because true justice for her would always mean one thing, the truth. Behind the headlines and policy reforms, Lauren's story remained an open wound in America's conscience. True crime creators, journalists, and advocates continued to explore her case, revisiting the inconsistencies that made it so haunting. The toxicology results, the unexplained presence of fentanyl, the untouched evidence in her apartment. The man who walked away without scrutiny, the questions still echoed through every retelling. Was it truly an accident or something that slipped through the cracks of a careless investigation? Why did it take social media outrage to move an entire police department to act? And perhaps the most painful question of all, if Lauren had been someone else, someone with a different skin color, a different background, would the outcome have been different? Those are questions that no amount of legislation can erase. Lauren's story also became part of a larger movement, one focused on the racial disparities within true crime media itself. Advocates began challenging major networks and streaming platforms to give equal visibility to victims of color. Online creators started dedicating episodes and documentaries to cases that mainstream media had long ignored. The world began to recognize that the silence surrounding Lauren's death wasn't isolated, it was systemic. And in that recognition came change. Her name started appearing in classrooms, community discussions, and media panels, not just as a tragic statistic, but as a catalyst for reform. In her hometown of Bridgeport, a memorial was built, small but powerful. It stands near the park she used to jog through, a plaque beneath her photo reading, "She sparked a movement for truth." Every December, candles light the walkway leading to the memorial. Family, friends, and strangers gather to honor her life, not just to mourn, but to celebrate her legacy. They share stories about her laughter, her kindness, her dreams. They remember how she once said she wanted to help people heal. In a tragic way, she did, because through her story, countless others found the courage to speak out, to demand better, to fight for justice. But even as the years pass, her mother admits the pain never truly goes away. Some nights, she says, she dreams that Lauren walks through the door smiling, vibrant, alive, as if nothing ever happened. And then she wakes up to the silence. In that silence, she finds strength, because she knows that every story told, every law changed, every young woman protected is part of Lauren's legacy. The world often remembers victims for how they died. But in Lauren's case, she is remembered for what she changed. She became the voice for women who were never heard, the reason policies were rewritten, the reason accountability was demanded. Her case taught the world that justice isn't just about catching a killer, it's about making sure no life and no death is ever dismissed again. In the end, the Lauren Smith Field's case remains a mystery wrapped in pain, a story without the closure her family deserved. But it's also a powerful reminder of resilience, of how one mother's refusal to stay silent changed everything. Lauren's name is now woven into the national conversation about justice, race, and reform. And every time it's spoken, whether in a documentary, a podcast, or a quiet whisper at her memorial, it carries weight. Because she's no longer just a victim, she's a symbol, a reminder that justice delayed is justice denied. And that no case, no matter how uncomfortable, should ever be left unanswered. In loving memory of Lauren Smith Fields, may her story continue to shine light on injustice. May her legacy continue to protect those who come after her. And may the truth someday finally come to light. The year after Lauren's death marked a new era, not just for her family, but for an entire generation of digital activists. What began as a family's plea for answers evolved into a nationwide movement for accountability, transparency, and equity in how justice is pursued. Lauren's story lived on not just through headlines, but through the voices of millions online who refused to let her name fade away. Social media had become the courtroom the world never built, a place where silence was shattered and where ordinary people became advocates. The #justice for Lauren was no longer just a call for truth. It became a community. On TikTok, creators analyzed timelines and police reports, breaking down inconsistencies that official statements ignored. On Twitter, journalists and activists dissected the systemic flaws that failed Lauren. On Instagram and YouTube, her story inspired true crime creators, artists, and everyday citizens to share her face, her name, and her fight. For the first time, people saw how digital pressure could force real-world change. Lauren's case proved that even in a world where justice moves slowly, collective outrage could make it move faster. But for her family, the online attention was both a blessing and a burden. It brought awareness, yes, but it also reopened wounds daily. Every post, every video, every speculation dragged them back to the morning their world fell apart. Still, they endured, because as painful as it was, they knew this visibility mattered. The digital world was doing what the real one had failed to do, demanding answers, refusing complacency, and amplifying Lauren's voice when she could no longer speak for herself. Her name became synonymous with a new kind of activism, digital justice. Through podcasts, documentaries, and online forums, the story continued to grow. Major platforms began to question their own biases, why certain cases received saturation coverage, while others, like Lauren's, needed celebrity attention to be seen. Journalists revisited dozens of overlooked cases involving young women of color, many of which mirrored the same systemic failures. Late investigations, missing evidence, and families left in silence. Lauren's case became the anchor, the cautionary example that reformers cited when demanding change, because it was never just about what happened in one apartment in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It was about what happens every time a life is lost and the truth is buried beneath bureaucracy. By 2024, the Lauren Smith Fields Foundation had expanded into a national network, connecting families across states who had faced similar neglect. Workshops were hosted to teach families how to navigate investigations, secure legal representation, and hold police accountable. The foundation even launched partnerships with local universities, funding scholarships in forensic science and criminal justice, turning tragedy into education, pain into purpose. At one seminar, Lauren's mother spoke softly but firmly to a room of young women. "If they ever tell you your story doesn't matter, remember, my daughter, she mattered, and so do you." The audience fell silent. Some cried, others nodded, because they understood that this wasn't just about one woman's death, it was about the world finally seeing what so many had tried to ignore. Lauren's case also changed how digital creators approached true crime storytelling. Where once entertainment often overshadowed empathy, her story reminded creators of the human cost behind every headline. Her face appeared in documentary openings, her name spoken with reverence, not as a subject, but as a symbol of accountability. True crime YouTubers, podcasters, and filmmakers began including disclaimers, empathy notes, and advocacy links, many citing Lauren's case as the turning point. Even law enforcement agencies began to feel the ripple effect. Departments across the country began updating their communication policies, emphasizing compassion, transparency, and family liaison programs. Lauren's death had forced uncomfortable conversations, but it also saved lives. Today, years later, the questions remain: what happened to Lauren Smith? Fields inside that apartment on December 12, 2021. Was it an accident, as the report claimed, or was it negligence, a preventable tragedy buried under official indifference? The answer may never come, but the fight she inspired continues. Each year, during the anniversary of her death, People gather online and in person to honor her memory. Candles are lit. Hashtags trend. Her name floods timelines once again, not as a fading memory, but as a call to action. Because for many, justice isn't only found in courtrooms. Sometimes it's found in the stories we refuse to let die. Lauren Smithfield's legacy is one of power born from pain. She became a reminder that even when systems fail, voices can unite, that a single story can expose injustice and change the way a nation thinks about accountability, and that the pursuit of truth is stronger than silence. Her story belongs to every family still waiting for answers. Every daughter deserves to come home. Every community is fighting to be seen. As the camera pans over the soft glow of candles at her memorial, her mother's words still echo through the crowd. They took her from me, but they didn't take her light. Her light lives in all of us now. The people gathered hold their candles higher, the flames flickering in the wind, a sea of warmth against the cold night air. And in that moment, Lauren's story feels less like a tragedy and more like a legacy. A reminder that justice is not only about punishment, it's about persistence. And as long as people continue to speak her name, her story will never truly end. In eternal memory of Lauren Smith, Fields, a daughter, a sister, a dreamer, may her light guide every fight for truth and equality. Lauren Smith, Fields' story did not end with her death. It rippled outward, reshaping conversations about policing, media coverage, and the safety of women navigating the modern world. Her case highlighted glaring systemic issues, from delayed notifications to families, to the casual dismissal of evidence, to the lack of urgency in investigating young women of color. The Bridgeport Police Department faced national scrutiny, forcing officials to implement changes they had long ignored. In response to the public outcry, the city instituted a series of reforms designed to prevent another tragedy like Lauren's: mandatory family notifications within 24 hours for unexplained deaths, improved evidence handling protocols for all crime scenes, creation of a family liaison unit to provide transparency and support, sensitivity and anti-bias training for all officers, emphasizing the equal treatment of victims regardless of race or social status. These changes, though overdue, marked a turning point. Lauren's story had become a catalyst for structural reform, proof that one life, even in death, could demand accountability. Lauren's case also sent shockwaves through the world of true crime storytelling. For years, the industry had focused on cases involving victims deemed newsworthy by societal standards, often young, white women. Lauren's story forced creators to reconsider their responsibility to victims and their families. Podcasts, YouTube channels, and documentaries began amplifying the voices of families of color. Ethical standards evolved, with creators now adding disclaimers, consulting families, and prioritizing facts over sensationalism. Her story inspired creators to combine awareness with advocacy, highlighting systemic injustices as much as the crime itself. Through this, Lauren's name became a symbol not only of loss, but of accountability and ethical storytelling. Lauren's death also sparked a nationwide conversation about the hidden dangers of online dating. Though she was cautious and careful, her encounter with a stranger revealed vulnerabilities inherent in meeting someone new in private spaces. Dating apps began emphasizing safety tips and educational prompts for users. Families and communities began urging open communication and safety measures, recognizing that the digital age, while connecting people, also carries unseen risks. Lauren's story was cited in awareness campaigns, teaching young women to trust instincts, communicate plans with friends, and prioritize personal safety. Her story became both a cautionary tale and a rallying cry for proactive measures to protect vulnerable individuals in the digital world. Lauren Smith, Field's life and the tragic circumstances of her death continue to leave an indelible mark on her community and the nation. Her family's persistence transformed grief into action. The Lauren Smith Fields Foundation supports other families in similar circumstances, providing resources, guidance, and advocacy. Public awareness about systemic disparities in law enforcement and media coverage has grown exponentially. Policy reforms in Bridgeport serve as a model for other cities grappling with similar failures. And while her mother still mourns the loss of her daughter every day, she takes comfort in the truth that Lauren's life has had meaning beyond the brevity of her years. Even as progress has been made, the central questions linger. How did Lauren Smith Fields die in her own apartment? Could her death have been prevented with proper investigation? Why was the man who was last with her never scrutinized thoroughly? And how many other cases go unexamined because of systemic neglect or bias? The answers may never be fully known. But Lauren's story continues to demand accountability, awareness, and reform, ensuring that her name, her life, and her fight are never forgotten. Lauren Smith Fields was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a dreamer, and a symbol of courage in the face of injustice. To her family, your pain, your persistence, and your advocacy have transformed tragedy into change. To the viewers and the world, Lauren's story reminds us that justice requires vigilance, compassion, and a refusal to ignore those who are often overlooked. May her memory continue to inspire action, demand truth, and protect those who are still vulnerable. Lauren Smith Fields may have been taken too soon, but her legacy will continue to shine a beacon of truth, accountability, and hope.